this year.
Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. It's my pleasure to take a call on this bill. Before I do, I must admonish my colleague gently, the member for Rotorua, for his faux pas in describing me as the member for Dunedin South. Of course, I am the member in Dunedin South. And in fact, if you ask the constituents of Dunedin South, they would probably say that I was the member for Dunedin South. The interesting thing is, if you ask the constituents in Dunedin North, they would say I was the member for Dunedin North as well. So I do understand the confusion. But in respect of the call from the member who is the Dunedin
point
North
of order.
Member of Parliament...
Point of order, Honourable David Cunliffe.
It's clearly outside Speaker's directions, Mr Speaker, for a member to refer to himself even in the imagined third person as the member for Dunedin South, when we all know, Mr Chairman, that he's been the member rejected by Dunedin South.
Order. That's making a political point. The member actually made no such claim. Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. That saves me speaking to the point of order. I will say that of the member for Dunedin North, that I think he's the revenue spokesman for Labour. And I'll give him this. He is definitely smarter than the previous spokesman for revenue that Labour had. Remember Stuart Nash? In fact, I must say, I was very, very worried that Mr Cunliffe was actually going into that territory that Mr Nash used to go to in taxing farmers' revenue. Remember that? Remember that? Labour wanted to tax farmers' revenue. The other credit that I will pay Dr Clark is that he's becoming very good at telling half a story extremely well. And it is true that, according to recent reports, 50% of New Zealand's top earners are not on the top tax rate. And I want to elaborate on Mr Dunn, the Minister's comments about why that is. And I'll remind members about the Tax Working Group report that was released in 2009. And it said that up until the late 1980s, early 1990s, we had one of the least distortionary tax systems in the world. And by the time National came back to office in 2008, it was one of the most distortionary in the world, with a punitive top tax rate, but legitimate tax planning opportunities for those high-income earners to move their income into trusts and into companies. And who was the government that allowed those tax loopholes to occur? It was the previous Labour government, actually asleep at the wheel in my view, but it's crocodile tears now to say that those top earners were given the opportunity to legitimately tax plan, to then criticise them for taking those opportunities. And I'm very proud of the fact that this minister and this government has actually reduced those opportunities, closed those loopholes, reduced the top tax rate away from a punitive 39 cents and down to 33 cents. But more than that, in Dunedin North and at the University of Otago, one of the biggest things that people said to me during the campaign last year in respect of student allowances was that the student allowance was available to the very poor and the very rich. And the thick middle weren't getting the opportunity to take the student allowances, and that wasn't fair. We agreed, and we have changed that by changing the definition of income for the calculation of student allowances, something that Labour should have done at the very start when they put in place the interest-free student loan scheme and the student allowance system that they did. But I want to remind this House, when that side bleats about tax rates, that we now have 3/4 of the taxpayers in this country paying no greater than 17 cents in the dollar marginal tax rate, and their full tax paid is about 15 cents in the dollar. That nearly half of families in New Zealand pay no net income tax after working for families, accommodation supplements and other income transfers. And we think that's pretty fair. What we don't think is fair is to tax further the 17% or so New Zealanders who are paying about 70-something% of net income tax in this country. That is punitive, that is envious, that is jealousy. And here he is, he interjects. This is another good half a story very well, because median take-home income has grown every year under this government. The net take-home pay gap has closed with Australia. And the only reason that the Gini coefficients are starting to drift away in the same way as they closed last year was because very high income earners take a big whack. They took an extremely large whack, and it's growing again. And maybe that top income bracket has grown slightly faster than the bottom two tiers, and the solution to that is jobs and growth. That's right. Job strategies. none of the things that we hear from Labor. And in fact, in respect of monetary policy, they want to loosen monetary policy to reduce exchange rates, which are really, the strategies are really the fly on the elephant's butt, I have to say, because it is simply not possible to move them in the way that they are. But no detail whatsoever. I'm still completely in the dark about what monetary policy Labor would follow were they in power. They talk about a capital gains tax, but who would be affected? They talk about putting the top tax rate back. We all understand what that means. No detail, just vague ideas.
Andrew Williams.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'll take a little call now, if I may, on behalf of New Zealand First. Small pun on words.
Not a prior call.